Step back in time and discover what fueled the world's most powerful spiritual leaders each morning. From humble tables to elegant trays, here's every pope's favorite breakfast, starting with Pope Francis. Pope Francis always favored simplicity, and his breakfast reflected that: a cup of strong yerba mate tea and a couple of media lunas, Argentina's beloved crescent pastries. Even after moving to Rome, he stayed loyal to his roots. Yerba mate, served hot and bitter, was both a beverage and a ritual in South America, a symbol of shared community and alertness. The media lunas were lightly sweet, brushed with glaze, and enjoyed warm. On occasion, he added a slice of toast with quince jam or a banana, but his usual fare remained modest. Vatican aides reported that even as Pope, he avoided rich meals in the morning. His breakfast, served early, was taken in silence or while reading scripture. In interviews, he said he saw breakfast as a chance to begin the day grounded and humble. Just like his leadership, it was about presence, not performance. A small cup, a small bite, and a wide-open heart. Hailing from Bavaria, Pope Benedict XVI never strayed far from his homeland's culinary traditions. His favorite breakfast? Simple and hearty, crusty German-style bread rolls, called semmeln, served with fresh butter and fruit jam, often cherry or apricot. Paired with black coffee or a warm herbal infusion, this breakfast was a quiet nod to his roots. In Bavaria, such a breakfast is common, filling without being heavy, flavorful without being rich. Even during his papacy, Benedict preferred it over more elaborate Vatican offerings. When guests joined him, the meal remained modest, with perhaps the addition of yogurt or soft cheese. His preference for this kind of breakfast mirrored his scholarly nature, thoughtful, structured, and deeply rooted in tradition. Vatican cooks quickly learned to bake semmeln fresh each morning just for him. This meal, taken early and without fanfare, was a spiritual warm-up for the day ahead, a quiet communion with the past and the world he quietly led. Born in Wadowice, Poland, Pope John Paul II remained devoted to the tastes of his homeland, even at breakfast. His favorite morning meal included slices of hearty rye bread, mild Polish cold cuts or sausage, and strong black tea with lemon. Occasionally, he'd add a soft-boiled egg or a smear of honey, but his breakfast always kept the simplicity and strength of his Polish upbringing. He often said that the foods of his childhood reminded him of resilience, of wartime meals and communal tables. Vatican chefs imported special bread and cured meats to keep his breakfast authentic. He took meals early, usually alone or with close aides, and preferred not to talk much until after morning prayer. For John Paul II, breakfast wasn't about indulgence. It was nourishment for the body before nourishing others through service. And each bite of rye, each sip of tea, carried the memory of the people who shaped him. But coming up next, a pope who surprised the Vatican with his unexpected taste in coffee, and another who kept his breakfast close to the habits of monks. Though Pope John Paul III served only 33 days as pope, his habits were well known, especially his fondness for a quick, no-fuss breakfast, a single strong espresso, and a crisp almond biscotto. Born in the Veneto region of Italy, he lived modestly as a priest and bishop, and brought those habits into the Vatican. He never cared much for lavish meals, and often skipped breakfast altogether when busy. But when he did eat, it was light and Italian to the core. Something simple, something sweet, and always with strong, hot coffee. Vatican kitchen staff recalled his humility and quiet demeanor, and how he often thanked them personally. He took breakfast early, sometimes standing, always without ceremony. That single biscotto, dipped in espresso, seemed to be all he needed to start the day. It was a breakfast of quiet strength, no frills, just flavor, and a perfect match for the gentle, fleeting spirit of the smiling Pope. Pope Paul VI was a modernizer in many ways, and his breakfast reflected a balance between tradition and post-war wellness trends. He began each day with toasted brioche, plain yogurt, and seasonal fruit, typically apples or figs. Born in Lombardy, he grew up with access to refined northern Italian cuisine, but adopted a restrained lifestyle as Pope. He liked things light, nourishing, and consistent. A glass of warm milk or mild tea accompanied the meal, which he usually took alone while reading scripture or Vatican updates. His breakfast mirrored his approach to leadership, dignified, thoughtful, and always mindful of moderation. He preferred the natural sweetness of fruit over pastries, and Vatican aides knew not to overwhelm his tray with excess. Paul VI was deeply spiritual, and each bite, calmly chewed, quietly appreciated, was part of a contemplative rhythm. It wasn't just about food. It was about intention. His breakfast, like his papacy, was measured with purpose. If you could share breakfast with any historical figure, pope or otherwise, who would it be and what would you serve? Let us know your dream breakfast table in the comments below. Pope John XXIII, affectionately known as Good Pope John, loved rustic traditional food, and breakfast was no exception. His favorite morning meal included soft-boiled eggs, a hunk of country-style bread, and a handful of black olives or tomato slices on the side. Raised in the Bergamo countryside, Angelo Roncalli grew up with farm-fresh meals, and he carried that love for simplicity into the apostolic palace. He requested bread from northern Italian bakeries and preferred olive oil to butter. While he rarely deviated from this routine, he welcomed the occasional bowl of warm soup on cold mornings. Those who served him noted his cheerful gratitude and how he often blessed the kitchen staff personally. His breakfast table was quiet, prayerful, and full of warmth. Just like his papacy, it was nourishing in spirit as well as substance. It wasn't fancy, but it filled the room with peace, gratitude, and a distinctly pastoral joy. Next up, a pope whose mornings began with café au lait, and another who asked for bread so dry it surprised even the chefs. These breakfasts are getting interesting. Pope Pius XII was known for his intellectual rigor, diplomatic precision, and unusually minimal breakfasts. Each morning he began his day with a large café latte and a few pieces of pan secco, or dry bread. No butter, no jam, and absolutely no adornment. It was a choice that surprised even his papal kitchen staff, who expected requests for rich Roman fare. But the Pope preferred austerity. Raised in an upper-class Roman family, Eugenio Pacelli was surrounded by formality, but lived with deep internal discipline. His breakfast mirrored that, refined, strict, and deeply rooted in routine. He often sipped his coffee while reviewing diplomatic cables or preparing for morning mass. Occasionally, if guests were present, fruit might be served, but for himself, it was always the same: bread, coffee, silence. In many ways, this stark breakfast reflected his papacy during World War II, one of restraint, internal struggle, and unwavering duty. Even at breakfast, he was quietly preparing for battle. Pope Pius XI, born Achille Ratti in the Lombard Alps, kept a hearty mountain man's appetite, even in the Vatican. His favorite breakfast? A bowl of warm polenta, softened with milk and drizzled with honey. It was filling, rural, and uniquely northern Italian. This wasn't a trendy dish, it was survival food turned soul food. The cornmeal base reminded him of his early years hiking alpine paths and studying theology in cold monasteries. Even after becoming pope, he insisted on traditional northern fare in the mornings. Served in simple bowls, often with a spoon carved from olive wood, the breakfast was sometimes accompanied by stewed apples or rustic biscuits. The meal energized him before hours of reading, walking, and diplomatic meetings. For a pope known for balancing scholarship with pastoral strength, polenta was the perfect metaphor: solid, reliable, and comforting. Vatican chefs found it odd at first, but for Pius XI, it was more than breakfast. It was home in a bowl. Pope Benedict XV, who led the Church during World War I, had a breakfast routine as unusual as his times. Each morning he began with hard-boiled eggs, a few slices of salted anchovies, and a cup of sweet black tea with lemon. Born into a noble Genoese family, Giacomo della Chiesa grew up by the sea, and anchovies were both staple and delicacy. He liked their brininess against the mildness of eggs, a balance of richness and restraint. His tea, always sweetened, brought a note of comfort to the table. Though unconventional by Roman standards, his breakfast reflected a wartime pope's need for clarity and energy. He reportedly ate early and quickly, often preparing for letters and communiques that would affect nations. Even in such gravity, he appreciated this briny, satisfying meal. Anchovies at the papal table? Unthinkable for some. But for Benedict XV, it was both taste of heritage and a reminder. Strength often comes from the sea's humblest gifts. Coming next, a pope with a sweet tooth for custard, and another who dined like a monk. These final papal breakfasts reveal a whole other side to holy mornings. Pope Pius X, canonized for his humility and reforms, favored a breakfast as gentle as his spirit, a simple bowl of semolina porridge, lightly sweetened and dusted with cinnamon. Born Giuseppe Sarto to a poor family in northern Italy, he never abandoned the peasant foods of his youth. The semolina, slow-cooked in milk until thick and smooth, was served warm, never hot, and topped with a whisper of brown sugar or honey. Occasionally, a slice of apple or raisin was stirred in. His preference never changed, even after ascending to the papacy. Vatican cooks initially offered more elaborate fare, but he politely declined. "Like the poor," he once said, "is how I should eat." His papacy emphasized spiritual nourishment and simplicity, and this breakfast mirrored that. No ceremony, no silver trays, just sustenance, gently prepared. Even the cinnamon was a touch from childhood, not luxury. In that quiet bowl, each morning began the same way, humbly, faithfully, and full of grace. Which breakfast on this list surprised you the most, or reminded you of your own traditions? Tell us in the comments which papal meal you'd try on a peaceful morning. Pope Leo XIII lived to be 93 years old, a remarkable feat for any time, and one that Vatican insiders sometimes jokingly attributed to his modest but hearty breakfast: chestnut bread and black coffee. Born in Carpineto Romano, a mountain town in central Italy, he grew up eating chestnut flour loaves, dense, earthy, and rich in nutrition. As Pope, he requested the same rustic bread every morning, often toasted and served with a thin coat of olive oil or fig jam. He paired it with a strong Caffè Nero, no sugar, no milk, just pure, bracing coffee. A scholar and statesman, Leo XIII liked his mornings quiet and structured. He would eat early, read letters and newspapers, and prepare for long days of political writing and doctrinal reflection. His breakfast was part fuel, part memory, part monastic in tone. Though modern tastes may balk at its austerity, his longevity may say otherwise. A peasant's meal? Yes, and perhaps a philosopher's secret weapon. Pope Pius XIX, who served as pope for over 31 years, started nearly every morning with two things: a cup of warm milk sweetened with honey and pane duro, or hardened bread rolls. This old-style Roman breakfast was common in the 1800s, especially for those raised in large families like his own. The milk soothed the stomach, and the bread, often dipped to soften it, provided just enough energy to begin the day. He occasionally added a boiled egg, but never anything extravagant. Pius XIX believed strongly in self-discipline, and his breakfast reflected that principle. Staff noted that he often broke the bread into small pieces slowly, almost meditatively, as he read or prayed. It wasn't a breakfast of power. It was a breakfast of preparation. In fact, some biographers suggest his deep sense of endurance, spiritual and political, was rooted in this early morning ritual. Simple, repetitive, steady, just like the papacy he steered through storms, revolutions, and the birth of modern Italy. But the next popes took breakfast to new places: mountaintop flavors, monastic simplicity, and even barley brews. These upcoming morning rituals reveal how food reflected faith across centuries. Pope Gregory XVI, a Camaldolese monk before his papacy, carried his ascetic habits into the Vatican, especially at the breakfast table. His morning began with a bowl of chestnut porridge, slowly cooked and thinned with warm goat milk. It was a regional dish from the Apennines, where he had spent much of his monastic life. The texture was thick, earthy, and modest, perfect for someone who believed deeply in spiritual simplicity. He disdained excess and discouraged lavish meals for papal staff. Instead, breakfast was taken alone, often in a cell-like chamber within his quarters, accompanied only by scripture or quiet contemplation. Chestnuts, common in poor rural diets, symbolized humility and endurance, two values Gregory XVI espoused both personally and politically. While critics called his rule repressive, his daily habits told a quieter story, one of rootedness, spiritual austerity, and reliance on the humble fruits of the land. Even his breakfast was a theological statement: nourishment, not indulgence. Though his papacy lasted less than 2 years, Pope Pius VIII's preferences were clearly remembered, especially his light pastoral breakfast: a wedge of soft white cheese, a handful of grapes, and dry, unsalted bread. Raised in northern Italy, he had a lifelong love of simple dairy and fruit-based meals. Even as Pope, he avoided anything rich or complex in the morning. His favorite cheese was robiola, a soft, tangy spread common in the countryside. Grapes were symbolic and seasonal, a reminder of both Eucharistic wine and God's abundance. His breakfast was quiet, intentional, and seasonal, served early before prayer and writing. Pius VIII saw food as a reflection of discipline: the sweetness of fruit, the softness of cheese, the crunch of bread. It was the perfect trio of textures and symbols. To him, breakfast wasn't just sustenance, it was gratitude made edible. Even the Vatican kitchen noted how little he requested and how deeply he thanked. Pope Leo XII, known for his conservatism and moral rigor, had a breakfast that echoed monastic roots rather than Roman splendor. Each morning, he sipped barley coffee, a caffeine-free brew made from roasted barley grains. paired with a few delicate almond biscuits. This substitute for traditional coffee was common among the clergy, especially in monasteries, where stimulants were often frowned upon. Leo XII found comfort in its toasted, nutty taste. The almond biscuits were made with only egg whites, ground almonds, and sugar, light but satisfying, a whisper of sweetness without indulgence. He often ate while standing, preferring to focus on scripture or state papers before morning audiences. The breakfast reflected his papacy, traditional, unembellished, and guided by spiritual vigilance. No meat, no cheeses, no lavish spreads, just the basics, handled with care. Even his personal cooks noted how rarely he asked for change. He viewed breakfast as duty, not delight, but the almond scent always softened his stern morning silhouette. Coming up, one pope who loved citrus on toast, and another whose breakfast came straight from a convent bakery. The next entries are full of tradition, flavor, and sacred simplicity. Imprisoned by Napoleon and exiled from Rome, Pope Pius VII endured much hardship, but he never lost his taste for a breakfast of citrus marmalade on toasted bread. Made from bitter oranges grown in the Vatican gardens or brought from Sicily, the marmalade was thick, slightly tart, and always handmade. He favored it atop pain integral, a rustic wheat loaf toasted until golden. Alongside it, he'd take a small ceramic cup of warm water with a splash of lemon. The entire meal was light and refreshing, intended to awaken body and mind without burdening them. Even during captivity in France, he requested marmalade if available, considering it not a luxury, but a taste of home and peace. The balance of bitter and sweet reflected his personality, calm under pressure, quietly enduring, and always hopeful. Vatican records noted that marmalade was often made in batches by nuns, then preserved in glass jars marked "For His Holiness." Best known for dissolving the Jesuit order, had a softer side, especially at breakfast. His favorite morning meal featured pan di latte, milk bread, gently warmed and served with convent-made jam. Strawberry, fig, or plum preserves were most common, delivered weekly by cloistered sisters who ran a nearby orphanage. Clement XIV valued their labor, and would often send handwritten notes of gratitude in return. The milk bread, slightly sweet, fluffy, and white, was served plain, with no butter, keeping the focus on the jam's flavor. His drink of choice? A light herbal infusion, usually chamomile. This gentle, comforting breakfast mirrored his quiet demeanor. Though he navigated political storms and theological controversies, Clement XIV found peace in ritual and modesty. He reportedly refused silver platters and ornate trays, preferring simple ceramic dishes. His breakfast was a pause before the politics, a moment of sweetness in a papacy that required constant poise. Pope Benedict XIV, one of the Enlightenment's most learned pontiffs, enjoyed a breakfast that reflected his cultured palate and Roman heritage. Fresh ricotta, drizzled with acacia honey and sprinkled with crushed walnuts. Born in Bologna, he cherished food that balanced tradition and nourishment. Ricotta, delivered fresh each morning from a local dairy, was served at room temperature in a shallow bowl. The honey added golden sweetness, while walnuts brought texture and warmth. Benedict XIV believed in moderation, but never denied the beauty of simple pleasures. He often paired this meal with a glass of diluted red wine or barley tea, depending on the season. He'd eat while reading theological essays, and occasionally shared a spoonful with guests, especially visiting scholars or diplomats. This wasn't just breakfast, it was dialogue in edible form. Rich in symbolism, the trio of ingredients represented purity, divine sweetness, and wisdom, a meal as thoughtful as the man who enjoyed it. Next, a pope who took his breakfast in silence, and another who believed morning meals should be shared. These final two reveal the heart behind the habit. Pope Innocent XIII lived and ruled with deep austerity. Each morning his breakfast consisted of plain gruel, a thin porridge made from oats or barley, and a single glass of cold water. No sugar, no fruit, no milk. The gruel was slow-cooked and unseasoned, served in an earthenware bowl. He reportedly ate it standing, in silence, after morning prayer. This Spartan choice stemmed from his belief in daily penance and spiritual detachment from luxury. While Vatican staff offered to improve the meal, he consistently declined. He considered his breakfast not just a meal, but a sacrificial act. Though his papacy was relatively brief and marked by controversy, his morning discipline was never questioned. For Innocent XIII, denying himself even the smallest comfort at dawn was a way to align body with spirit. Gruel and water may seem bleak, but for him, it was clarity. And perhaps in that daily discipline, he found a strength others never noticed. Pope Clement XI began each day not alone, but in quiet fellowship. His preferred breakfast included fresh bread, slices of young pecorino cheese, and ripe pears, often shared with a secretary, scholar, or visiting cleric. Born to an aristocratic Roman family, Clement XI saw food as a form of hospitality, especially in the morning when minds were clear and hearts open. He believed in conversation over coffee and ideas over indulgence. The pears were picked from the Vatican gardens or gifted by countryside parishes. The bread was warm, the cheese soft, and the mood reflective. Occasionally, a light red wine was served with water. These small meals turned into informal councils, moments of intellectual and spiritual exchange. In a time when breakfast was often solitary, Clement XI made it communal. It was nourishment, yes, but also invitation. To him, sharing food was sharing grace. And in every simple bite, the bonds of the Church grew just a little stronger. I hope you enjoyed this spiritual and flavorful journey through papal breakfasts. These humble meals nourished great minds and hearts. Which inspired you most? Share below and stay tuned for more. Until next time.